and we visited Jewish communities in Uganda and Tanzania, and I brought you back a kippah from this community. And I'm like, what did you just say? Jewish communities in Uganda and Tanzania? Since when?
Not all Palestinians, but majority of Gazans celebrated October 7th. That is the reality. Okay.
And he asked him, do you support what happened on October 7th? And he said, not only do I support it, I teach my kids that this is the way of Islam.
Welcome back to another episode of Black and Jewish Podcast. I'm your host, Ashira Solomon, and today I have a very, very, very special guest with me in the studio, Rudy Rochman, Jewish and Israeli activist, educator, filmmaker, shaking things up in the world. Thank you so much, Rudy, for being here.
Of course, appreciate you bringing me on this platform.
How have you been?
Baruch Hashem, times are a little bit rough in the world, but this is why we're here, to bring light to where there are problems and to elevate this world as much as we can.
I have so many questions for you, and at the end, I really want to know the secret to staying calm in the midst of idiots, but we'll get there. I want to talk about so many things. I know you have your We Were Never Lost film going on, Black and Jewish relations, but the most pressing issue right now, which everyone is talking about, obviously, is the Israeli and Palestinian war, what's happening in Gaza. I know you were in Gaza. So can you just tell us what your experience was in Gaza, how long you were in Gaza, and what you saw in Gaza?
Yeah, so first of all, you know, it's horrible that we're even in this situation where Israelis and Palestinians, who are cousins culturally, historically, and genetically, have to be forced to live in this matrix where we see each other as opposed to one another and are fighting each other. There should be neither population that is dying. We are family. There is no future where either population disappears. So only continuing a reality where we make one identity seem as the exact opposite to the aspirations of the other identity, then that only continues this loop of violence and fuels the fire to continue. So I want to just say that for starters, you know, as an Israeli, I did the army actually at age 17. Most Israelis join at 18, but I joined earlier. Wow. I got out of the army in 2013, so it's over 10 years ago already. And on October 7th, which most people know what happened on October 7th, which
Rudy, were you in Israel on October 7th?
Yes.
Okay, because we both live in Jerusalem.
Correct.
So were you in Jerusalem that night?
So October 6th, I leave from Jerusalem to a city 45 minutes north of Tel Aviv, where my grandparents have a house.
Okay.
I went there to do Shabbat dinner with my grandparents who had flown in from France. They have a house in this place.
Close to Gaza or no?
No,
okay.
North.
In the north. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So it's 45 minutes north. It's near, let's say, Hadera.
Okay.
And we did Shabbat dinner under the sukkah. It was supposed to be my cousin's wedding on the 10th. So all the family was united to celebrate this time. And, you know, Jews, they do a Shabbat dinner before and after the wedding, Shabbat Chatan and Kala.
Yeah.
And my grandfather had paid the Kiddush for the brunch for the synagogue the next day for Shabbat. So it was just a joyous time to be with the family. And so on October 7th, I woke up in this family house to a knock on the door by my mom, who was full of tears in her eyes, and starts showing me these videos and pictures of what a lot of us were just starting to see. Yeah. You know, these pickup trucks in Sderot with terrorists jumping out, bodies of IDF soldiers being dragged on the streets of Gaza, Nova Festival survivors running for their lives. And the moment I saw these images, I knew that this was different than what we had experienced. You know, living in Israel, terrorism is not something that's new to us, unfortunately.
Right.
Nor do we allow it to get to us and to break us.
Not at all. I'm in Israel and they're like, oh, sure, is this your first war? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, okay, you'll be good. Yeah. Like, you'll get over it. Yeah. Like, Israelis are just like so strong, and it's like almost normal. Like, as an American, you know, living in Israel, it was like jarring. My parents are like, come home. Right. Like, you know, we don't have that same inner toughness that way, but Israelis are like, it's fine.
Well, as a tangent, there's two things to say about that. First of all, overall, I feel much safer in Israel than I do in America. Yeah. And if you look at statistically per capita, the amount of crime, it's actually higher in many places in America than it is in Israel. Yes. But there's such a, you know, sense of feeling when someone dies. It's like the whole country is mourning. Whereas here in America, you see it on the news, you don't really care. It's far from you. Yes. So there's that element. And I would also say that the goals of terrorism, it's really an anti-colonial tool, right? Because they're trying to terrorize a people to make them leave. That's why they call the intifada, because they're going to shake off. Intifada in Arabic means to shake off. Yeah. Their quote unquote view of a person that's the colonizer, and then eventually they'll leave. But it's not working because you're using an anti-colonial tactic on indigenous people that happens to be 100 times stronger than you physically in terms of our military might. So obviously terrorism doesn't work.
Spiritually, though, I would say.
Look, to just put it to the fact, Israel's obviously militarily stronger.
Yeah.
So it has that 100 times more power than those who commit terrorism against us. And also, if you use anti-colonial tactics against indigenous people, especially people who've been traumatized for generations, we're going to respond.
Yeah.
So these tools and these methods are not actually achieving their goal. But anyways, on October 7th, I wake up, I see these videos, and I realize that this is different. I'm in reserves as a combat soldier in the paratroopers, and I knew that I'd likely be called back up. So I started to pack my civilian stuff that I had brought for the wedding and that week. And maybe 45 minutes later, I get a call from my commander, says "Ukpatsta," which means you're getting jumped. You're getting called back up. So drove as fast as I could from that house to Jerusalem, to where I live, dropped off my personal stuff, picked up my army bags, drove to the base, got on my uniform. They gave us a gun. Soldiers who didn't have certain gear, they gave whatever they could, but many soldiers didn't even have boots. Like, I went to war with friends of mine that went in with running shoes. And
can you talk about what was the failure on Israel's part of why so many soldiers didn't have equipment? Like, I know we had Floyd Mayweather, flying things in on his private jet. Lots of people in America flying things in for equipment for our soldiers. And I was like, well, what happened? Like, why weren't we prepared, in your opinion?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's many reasons. I think the system in Israel is structured to think very short term.
Okay.
Even if you look at the government political system, you have a coalition and you have to have at least 61 seats out of 120, at least over half, to have a majority. But no one party has 61 seats. You have 10 here, 20 here, 5 here. And so to get 61, you have to make a coalition. But the moment one of those seats pulls out and you no longer have a majority, you could have a new election the next day.
Right.
So already from the top, you have a reality where at any moment you can have a new election. And it's so unstable. And it forces people in these positions to think really short term. What can I do now that gives me a quick return that I could use that to get reelected? Rather than what can I look on the long end of being prepared and moving us forward. And so I think from the top down, the structure in Israel, the bureaucracy in Israel is very short-term thinking. Definitely also not in a way that's united. The fact that we have a left and right in Israel is ridiculous, because people who vote for the right, not the right itself, but people who vote for the right, they care about security, they care about economy, they care about the land. People who vote for the left, they care about human rights, they care about poverty, they care about the environment. Who said that these things contradict? They don't. So the system we have is a divisive system, and not a system that brings parts of truth together, but use them.
System,
right, exactly. Right? It's a British parliamentary style system.
Right.
And so already there's that, plus a lot of the gear that they had saved for a day like this were in these storage containers that was sitting in the sun for like 6 years. And so you come and all of a sudden you open these things and the bags are ripping and the things that you have there are just no longer usable. And so a lot of people didn't have it. But anyways, we get there and at 4 p.m. they tell us, all right, everyone onto the cars, onto the Jeeps and onto the Hummers. We have no idea where they're taking us. We're reservists, so we're trained to be soldiers, but you'd expect maybe we would exchange current soldiers who are on a border and we would go and replace them on the border and they would go and fight instead.
Right.
But we get into these cars, we start to drive south, drive, and all of a sudden we pass this like police checkpoint. The police who had created a blockade to prevent more Hamas terrorists from continuing their massacres in the rest of the places. And they open this checkpoint and all the police officers are like applauding. And that's the moment it hits us, like, we're going in right now to fight Hamas. And you imagine that, one day I'm, doing Sukkot and working on my projects of uniting Israelis and Palestinians and bringing awareness to the tribes of Israel and doing activism and having meetings. And I have all these things planned. My schedule is very busy. And out of nowhere.
I know you were supposed to go back to Africa, to Nigeria.
Exactly. November 5th, I was supposed to fly to Nigeria to continue the filming. And all of a sudden, October 7th happens. I'm pulled out of my life and thrown into a war. And I remember the drive after we passed that checkpoint, we started seeing bodies all over on the streets. People were killed, burned to a crisp, like they're frozen in time. And then we get to Kfar Aza, which was one of the hardest hit communities. And we were the unit that took back Kfar Aza. And so for 2 days, we were fighting there and saw, the most horrendous things. A lot of people like to deny what happened, but I saw it firsthand with my eyes. Men, women, children, elderly, no discrimination on age, sex, or what they look like. And not just killed, but tortured. And you can see the torture of what people went through, even with their bodies on the floor.
Really, I didn't know you've seen all the bodies.
Yeah. But we're there for about 2.5 days. From there, Zaka came, which is the unit that picks up those dead bodies, and it was countless. And from there, we had a few months of training and preparation, and then we were sent into Gaza. We were the first unit in Khan Yunis. I didn't see any civilians except for one person when we went in, and we were the first unit in, right? It's not like the IDF had been there already. We found these leaflets all over that the IDF had dropped, warning the civilians days before to leave the area because the IDF was going to come in, which just shows that the IDF is doing everything to prevent civilians being in the line of fire.
Historically, have other militaries done that when they've gone to war?
No.
It's just something that Israel does,
Yes.
the IDF does.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm proud that Israel does that because I don't want any civilians, because I don't even want to take a life, period.
Yeah.
But let alone the life of a civilian having to be caught in the situation is horrible. But, this real city, it's not a military base. It's an actual city where human beings are living. There were terror tunnels everywhere. They were ready for this, right? The Hamas would pop out, release like a bunch of bullets, come back in. There were terror tunnels everywhere. There were houses that were booby trapped, waiting for soldiers to come in to explode. It was a war zone.
Wow.
We only saw one civilian that day. And my entire time, I only saw one other civilian in front of me. So my entire time, 2 months in Gaza, only saw 2 civilians, but that day only saw one. And that civilian was some elderly woman that clearly had some sort of dementia or mental health issue.
So you didn't see civilians because they dropped the leaflets and the civilians left?
They had evacuated.
They did evacuate.
Correct.
Okay.
The only other civilians we saw was through drones where they were trying to find Hamas terrorists, and there's like a school where all the civilians are at.
Okay.
But only engaged with 2 civilians my entire time. And the first one was that first day.
Okay.
And it was a woman that had some sort of mental health issues. You can see she was a little bit like, schizophrenic and screaming, that's why she was left behind, because nobody really took care of her. And we realized that she wasn't a threat. They took her, they brought her to a civilian area, and she was safe.
Yeah.
Besides that, it was only Hamas until one of the later days that we were there. There was an individual who was trying to steal some supplies, which understandable, the situation that they're in.
Right.
And he crossed an area where the IDF was in, so they apprehended him to make sure it was safe. And he ends up being a school teacher.
Okay.
And one of my friends who...
Hopefully not for UNRWA.
I don't know for UNRWA, but not so different than what UNRWA teaches, unfortunately.
Okay.
A friend of mine who speaks Arabic asked him, what do you do? He's like, I'm a school teacher of Islam for young children.
Okay.
And he asked him, do you support what happened on October 7th? And he said, not only do I support it, I teach my kids that this is the way of Islam. Which
Rudy,
it isn't.
I have to ask you, because I know you work with Palestinians.
Yes.
I had said on another platform of mine that I'm on in a show in Israel, and I said, listen, not all Palestinians, but majority of Gazans celebrated October 7th. That is the reality. And, you can never say all, but I would say, I think they polled them at 90%. So what do you say, having engaged with actual Palestinians on the ground? What do they think about Israel? What do they think about the Jewish people? Do they want to live with us in one state or 2 states? I don't support the 2-state solution, but do they really want to live with us in peace?
So there are a few things to say about that. The first thing, the polls came out, I think it was about 80%.
80%, okay.
But, we need to understand that there's no freedom of speech for Palestinians. If anyone says anything other than the narrative of Hamas or doesn't support Hamas, they get killed.
Okay.
So if you're giving polls to people on the streets in Gaza and you're asking them, are you for Hamas or against Hamas? And there's a bunch of Hamas terrorists around you, what do you think they're going to say?
Sure. Yeah.
So I don't think that the actual polls are representative of...
You think it's less, in your opinion?
I think it's much less.
Much less.
Much less.
Even what we've seen from social media accounts.
There's a
UNRWA
strong
schools.
percentage that is supporting Hamas. Less now. given what happened, and they realize that Hamas is stealing on the aid and killing their people and caused this to begin with. So a lot less now. But you have to also understand that for 18 years, we've known what Hamas was doing. You know, I didn't need to go into Gaza and pull out 3 suitcases filled with Hamas propaganda, teaching kids on how to want to kill Jews, to know that Hamas was educating their next generation, to contextualizing their suffering by saying that the reason for why you suffer is because Israel exists, and the way to end that suffering is by killing Israelis. That's what they teach them. And so we need to understand that they've been brainwashed, right? We need to try to heal them, to fix the situation. A big part of being a Jew, not to say that we're any better or worse than any other people, but part of our culture is to look at something bad and to find the good in it, right? There's like many greats of the generations that we learn from our sages and in our history. There's, for example, Noah, right? And then there's Abraham and there's Moses. And why is Abraham and Moses considered to be a part of the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, but yet Noah isn't? And it says that if you look at these 3 individuals who were leaders of their generation, each of them were facing a situation where God had given up on humanity. God had given up on humanity, said, that's it, we're going to just destroy everyone. And the difference is that Noah said, okay, you want to create a flood? Fine. Tell me what to do, I'll do it. You tell me you want to kill the world, do what you want and save me. If that's what you want, I'll do it. Abraham gets told to, that Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be destroyed. And he's like, no, there's still going to be good people there. We're going to find, there might be 100. No, there's 50. And he's doing everything he can to find even the little bit of light, the little bit of good to try to save the rest of humanity. Even Moses, after the golden calf, God gives up on the Jewish people. And Moses like, no, there's still good within them.
He's like, I'm going to start over with you, Moshe. And he's like, no.
He's like, no, they're still good. And so something that we need to understand as Jews is that we don't look at situations, and even if there's a majority that's bad and there's a minority that's good, we take that minority that's good and we make them into the majority. And so that's one element. The second element is we need to understand, since this is a Jewish podcast as well, there's Jewish stories that teach us on how to view different situations. And I think if we want to understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and why there's so much rage against us and a lot of desire to kill us amongst many, we need to understand the relationship between Yitzhak and Ishmael.
I'm so happy you brought that up. I think I actually DM'd you and was like, do you think Ishmael is Amalek? Explain who Amalek is and Ishmael and everything for people who don't understand.
Sure. So Amalek is considered to be a nation. They used to be a physical nation, but now we believe them to be more of a spiritual nation. So it doesn't have to be the genetic descendants, but it can exist within different peoples. And it's a nation that we experience as the worst of our enemies. They attacked us from the back, killing women and children and elderly. And it's not just an enemy of Israel. It's also a very specific enemy that they're against our role. If you look at a lot of people who are against the Jewish people, the far right thinks we're the left, the far left thinks we're the right, the capitalist blames us communism, the communist blames us capitalism, the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis, we're enemy number one, the black supremacist Farrakhan's think we're enemy number one. We're literally hated by all extremes on all societies. However, we're hated for things that we didn't do. Right? When we're blamed for the death of Jesus by the Christians, when we're blamed for the economic situation in Germany, or blame that economic situation in Spain leading to the Holocaust and the Inquisition, we're blamed for things that we didn't do. Black Plague, COVID, so on. Amalek doesn't hate us for what we didn't do or who we're not. They hate us specifically for who we are. Amalek is an enemy that looks at the Jewish people, recognizes that they're here to bring light into this world. They're here to bring God into our lives, the understanding that we're all a part of one. And we are here to fight that. And you look at Hitler, he's considered to be the reincarnate of Haman and Amalek. He writes in his book, the Jews were here to bring consciousness, and I'm here to remove it. Also, Amalek is supposed to be against circumcision specifically, and Hitler banned circumcision. And so if you look at Hamas, although they are our enemies, they do hate us, they're very vile in their approach of massacring the Jewish people. So no one's saying that they're not evil, and no one's saying that they're not an enemy, but they're not here to be against God. They're not here to prevent circumcision.
So this is why we don't consider them Amalek, because they're not against God.
I think a lot of Jews are saying that they're Amalek because we're taught this is our worst enemy. This is the enemy our generation is currently experiencing, so it must be them.
That's how my understanding was, that anyone who attacks us, and is our enemy, they can be considered Amalek. We just can't declare them as Amalek because we don't have a Sanhedrin and we can't vote and say this is Amalek. But that was my understanding. Like anyone who's an enemy can be Amalek.
Right, but then why aren't the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Romans, the Greeks, the Moabites, the Philistines, like all these enemies of Israel, they're not considered Amalek.
Right.
So it's not to say that we don't have enemies and that Hamas isn't an enemy.
Yeah.
I think the term Amalek is to identify a specific type of enemy.
Okay.
And that specific type of enemy is an enemy that's here to be the counter to what we're meant to do in our mission and hates us looking at us who we are and is like, I'm here to be against that, not misunderstanding who we are and hating us for it, which is usually what anti-Semitism is and also what Hamas is. I mean, if you ask people who support Hamas, they think Israel's apartheid, genocide, ethnic cleansing, colonization, settlements, all the things that we're not.
Yeah.
And all the things that actually the West did to the world and that the far left feels so guilty for the crimes of their ancestors that rather than looking in the mirror and owning up and changing the world, fixing what their ancestors have done, they use the Jews as a scapegoat and pin it onto us.
Yeah.
So there's enemies that hate us for who we're not, and there's enemies that hate us for who we are. And again, a specific thing of Amalek is being against circumcision. That's a character that must be included in Amalek's nature.
Amalek. Okay.
Right. And Hamas is not against circumcision, right?
Okay.
So that's number one. Now, in terms of understanding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through looking at the stories of our ancestors and our archetype stories that give us wisdom to understand the situation. Abraham, first person to bring back this concept to the world that we are all a part of one, to remove idolatry, revolutionary person, who, by the way, although was born in the region of what is today considered Mesopotamia/Iraq, descends from Hebrews who came from the Levant, Israel, before that, right? If you look at the Hebrews, Ivrim in Hebrew, they're descendants of Ever, and Ever was living in the land of Israel. Yeah. And so a lot of people are like, oh, well, you actually descend from Iraq, and Abraham came in. No, he was born in diaspora and came back home. Yeah. So he's actually the first Jew who came out of diaspora and came back home.
I love that.
Yeah. Whoever wants to use the Torah to use against us, you have to use the entire thing. You can't just take things out of context.
Right.
But Abraham, his father, is an idolater. He has a shop selling idols. He realizes that idolatry is bad, smashes his father's shop, teaches lessons that we need to remove ourselves from something disconnecting us from the creator, from the universe, from the oneness that we exist. That's how we view Hashem. It's not just one individual. It's the oneness. It's infinite. It's divine beyond even our human comprehension to understand the extent of this oneness that exists. Abraham's children. Now, Abraham has Sarah, his wife, his beloved soulmate, and Sarah is getting old and cannot have children. Yep. So Sarah tells Abraham, listen, you need to have an heir. Your line needs to continue. Yeah. Hagar, take Hagar on and you'll have a son. So he marries Hagar as a second wife, has a son, Ishmael, which means to listen to Hashem. Ishma is to listen.
Hebrew, or who is she?
She's not a Hebrew. I don't remember her exact lineage, but she's of the Middle Eastern peoples. Okay. So she is the descendant of Sem. That's why we're all Semites in the region. So Shem was a son of Abraham. So we're all Semites in that region, but she's not specifically a Hebrew. Okay. And so he takes on Hagar, marries Hagar, and has Ishmael, which means listening to God. Ishma is listen, lishmoa. El is Hashem, God. So his name is listening to God. And imagine he's raised for 13 years of his life before Isaac is born as the prodigy. You're the next one in line. You are going to be the next leader. You have big shoes to fill. You're going to be amazing. You're going to be great. So imagine a kid growing up with so much kavod, so much honor, so much respect. You know, this level of birthright that you have, that you're already great just being born. And all of a sudden, Sarah has a kid. The impossible happens, right? Yeah. She's super old. Even when Sarah heard that she was going to have a kid, she laughed. Again, that's why Yitzhak's name is to laugh. Yeah. And Yitzhak is born, and all the attention shifts to Yitzhak. Now imagine what that does to a teenager, right? That was raised thinking, you know, I'm the best, and all of a sudden nobody cares about you anymore. Yeah. And everyone's focusing on Yitzhak. And it can be good for a person and it can be bad for a person. In this situation, it was bad. Yeah. And he starts becoming a bad influence onto Yitzhak, trying to corrupt him. You know, there's that story of a arrow with an apple on a person's head that actually comes from Ishmael doing that to Yitzhak.
Oh, really?
Yes, doing target practice on his own brother and doing things to, that's actually from there.
Oh, wow.
And doing many things to spiritually put him down because he's jealous.
Yeah.
And we can understand naturally, exactly. It's not in any way to say he's a bad person. It's like, unfortunately, the dynamics of the situation that neither Yitzhak nor Ishmael created produced this reality. Sarah sees this. Obviously, as a mother, she's not putting up with this. And she demands from Avraham to banish Hagar and Ishmael. Yeah. And he agrees. And so Hagar and Ishmael get banished to the wilderness. Now, your brother has already taken your birthright. Add on to that now your mother is treated like she's nothing. And you're in the wilderness in famine and in drought. There's storylines then from the Muslim perspective in the Quran of an oasis and miracles that happen along their journey. But all of a sudden, the contextualization of his suffering is, if Isaac wasn't born, I'd be still amazing. And so my suffering comes from Isaac. And due to that trauma, he comes to the conclusion that he needs to kill Isaac. Isaac stole everything from me, and he's my enemy and the source of all of my pain. Yeah. And he turns into a person filled with rage, filled with hate, filled with desire to kill. Yeah. But he also has superpowers. He's able to gather armies and be very social and connecting with people. And what do we see in the parallels? Now, Isaac is born, Ishmael gets kicked out. Not because Isaac wanted, but due to the situation. Israel's born, Palestinians get kicked out.
Yeah.
Not because Israel wanted Palestinians to get kicked out, but due to the situation, the context of everything that's happening. Ishmael sees Isaac as the source of his problems. Palestinians see Israel as the source of all of our problems. Wow. It's an exact parallel of the dynamics of what's happening. Now, Yitzhak doesn't hate Ishmael, but is like, look, I'm not going to let you kill me.
Yeah.
And I don't hate you. I don't know why you hate me. I never did anything. And that's the same position of Israel. It's an identical situation. But the storyline doesn't end with them just hating each other. The storyline actually ends with Avraham dying, their father, and Ishmael and Yitzhak coming together, and Ishmael looking at his brother and saying, you can go first to bury our father. You were the one chosen to be the person to carry on the legacy, and we will work together. And Avraham always knew that both of them had their own strengths. Ishmael was amazing at being social and gathering armies and, was more extroverted. Yeah. And Yitzhak was more introverted, wasn't so good at social and telling stories. I mean, we're stuck at telling stories to the world. We're good at telling internal stories, or we're stuck at telling external stories.
Our PR sucks.
But Yitzhak had gvura and had a foresight, and they actually both needed each other to fill the role of Avraham. And so the storyline that ends is that Ishmael at some point does tshuva, heals himself, and no longer hates his brother. But how does that happen? It's actually not by the death of Avraham that this work was done.
I was going to ask you, who needs to die so we can come together?
That's how I was thinking about it when I was younger. I was like, okay, so what is the death of Avraham that gets them to come together? Yeah. The death of Avraham is, I think, in my opinion, is our egos. But something happens before that allows this to happen. And it's actually the death of Sarah. Now, when Sarah dies, obviously Yitzhak is broken. His mother just passed away. But he sees his father so destroyed from within, cannot function, cannot move, is going to die himself if something is not done. And he realizes that the only person who can really be by his side is Hagar. And he tells his father, I know my mother just died and she would never wanted to see this, but I'm putting my ego to the side and you need to bring back Hagar and I'm giving you this blessing. And by then Hagar actually does tshuva and comes back with a different name. Yeah. But it's still the same person. And when Ishmael hears this, he's like, wait a minute. The person that I thought had the intention of putting me down, of taking my birthright, of dishonoring my family, is now the one repairing my honor, is now the one restoring my mother back to her place, is now the one fixing my problems. And that's like, it doesn't make sense, right? The equation that I saw the world through, now I put an input, I'm getting a different output. It must not be the same equation. Yeah. And this selfless action of Yitzhak fixing the problems of Ishmael is what frees Ishmael from his psychological prison of hatred and rage and allows him to realize, wow, I actually never really knew who my brother is, because now keep in mind, he's much more mature. He's older.
So Rudy, are you saying we as Jews, we need to free Palestine?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
And what does that look like?
Well, we need to understand, although we didn't create the problems of Palestinians, we today have the power, thus the responsibility to repair it. And if we talk about doing tikkun olam and ola goyim, healing the world and empowering all nations, well, definitely starts with tikkun babayit ma'bnei dodim, healing our own home with our own cousins. And I think once Palestinians have a different relationship with Israel, that this civilization and this people are taking the responsibility, providing you equality and honor and respect and the best of lives for you to fulfill your greatest potential, doing everything they can to remove your suffering, there won't be this rejection of Israel, just like the situation was healed. Because the reason for why Palestinians hate Israel is because they're told the reason you suffer is because of Israel. And the way that you end that suffering is by removing Israel. But if Israel plays a role of ending their suffering and giving them salvation, there's no more reason to hate Israelis. And a lot of Israelis are like, well, they're just born with hatred, and no one is born with hatred, right? They're told that the reason why he suffers is because of Israel, so that's why they're rejecting Israel.
How do Israelis receive that message that you just said?
It depends.
I imagine they're like, no.
It depends.
We're going to destroy and get rid of.
It depends who and it depends when.
Okay.
In terms of when, obviously when we're at a war, when the trauma is so fresh, when people have lost people right now, I just this week even lost 2 friends of mine. When the trauma is so fresh, it's hard for people to hear on both sides. And also, there are people who are extreme right and they can't hear such a message. But if you speak a truth, it resonates. And if you put it into practice and show it, people will accept it. The same way most people were like, it's crazy, you're going to create a state of Israel after we just went to the Holocaust. Insane. But today, everyone's looking back and saying, yeah, of course we could have done it. So people who change history are those who don't listen to others who call them out for being too idealistic or utopian, because those people who want to see a better future and know it could be happen, they're the ones who create that future.
Wow. So what would that look like from Israel's standpoint to really free Palestine? Does that mean we give them a state? Does that mean we have one state and we're all living together? Like, how do we help them? What help do they need?
Sure. So to understand what to create, we need to understand the needs of both. We don't have the same aspirations. And unfortunately, we tend to superimpose what we want onto assuming that they want the same and vice versa. And we also don't have the same injustices, nor is it a competition. We have different injustices we experience and we have different aspirations. We need to understand what the aspirations of the Jewish people are and be open and proud and true to it.
Okay.
There is no reality that will exist where we don't have full physical, military, economic, and political control over this land. From the river to the sea. There is no reality where Jerusalem won't be its capital, and there is no reality where there won't be a third temple.
Okay, period. So how do we help the Palestinians?
Now,
they don't agree with that.
Well, that doesn't take anything away from them.
Right.
If they can get what they want, which is right of return, and full equality and respect from the river to the sea.
Okay.
So the question is, how do we create those two things? Most Jews, when they hear right of return for Palestinians, it's so many Palestinians coming that hate us. Many of them do. And the demographics just aren't, feasible, because they would overrun us. They would be too much. We would become a minority. We would be targets. We would eventually be killed by this population who many of them already hate us. And so that's not feasible in the eyes, not because we're against the idea at its core of an idea of right of return, but because in its practice, in our interpretation, it means our destruction.
What is the right of return for Palestinians? And tell me, are Palestinians really an ethnic group, or are they just Arabs?
So Palestinians are a collective who descend from this land that are eternally connected to this land.
Okay.
Arabs are people from Arabia, although today the term is also used to define someone who speaks Arabic.
So they're not from Arabia?
No. Some of them are.
Okay.
But the large percentage of them descend actually from Jews that were converted to Islam and Christianity over time. If you go to places like Yatta, Yafo, Palestinians that were born in Safed or Tzfat, in Jerusalem, in Hebron, in Shechem, that is now called Nablus, in Natzeret, in Bethlehem, in all these places that used to be ancient Jewish villages, 80 to 90% of them genetically are descendants of Jews.
Wow.
So a large percentage of the Palestinians, and they know this more than we do. For Jews, it's like, what do you mean? Most Palestinians know this, right?
Okay.
If you speak to Palestinians, you ask them, where are you from? And they'll say, oh, my grandparents were in Yafo.
But they weren't Palestinians then if they were descended from Hebrews.
Well, let's put it this way. The land for the past 2,000 years was called Palestine.
Right.
That was an act of colonization by the Romans. before Islam, before Arabs spread into this land, because the Philistines were our latest enemies at the time. And actually, Philistine in Hebrew, Palestine in Hebrew means invaded land.
Yeah.
Like Polesh means invade. And
but just to be clear, the Philistines are not the
correct.
Palestinians of today, because people love to say, no, they're the Philistines. Correct. It's like, no, they're wiped out and they no longer exist.
Exactly. Okay. They are a pre-Greek population that came from the island of Crete, that were polytheistic, and that were basically the Vikings of the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to say Palestinians are the Philistines, then you're indigenous to Crete and you're a polytheistic Viking, but they're not.
Yeah.
Okay. What's interesting also is that they live in the region of Gaza, the Philistines. So these things that are like constantly, these loops of history throughout time that are replaying themselves is all very interesting. But the Romans are the next enemies to the Jewish people. And when they colonize our land, they were like, okay, well, let's name it by one of your latest enemies. It's like someone were to spray paint on your house and write Hitler because they know that that's offensive to the Jews. So they renamed our land Palestine as an act of colonization, which Palestine in Hebrew literally means invaded land.
Okay.
And keep in mind, we fast forward after the Romans, you have the different caliphates, and you have the Byzantine, you have eventually the Ottomans, and eventually at latest the British. And this land is always called Palestine at that time. Now, for someone who's a Palestinian who is now no longer a part of the Jewish people because they converted out and they assimilated into other mentalities, they started speaking Arabic instead of Hebrew. And so they no longer identify with the storyline of Am Yisrael. They don't learn Torah, they don't learn about history, but the connection and love for the land is the same and stays because they never left.
Right.
So they still love the land just as much, even though they're Muslim and they pray towards Mecca. Their heart is in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Okay. And so imagine that all of a sudden a war happens.
That's pretty deep what you just said. They pray towards Mecca, but their heart is in Jerusalem.
Yes.
It says a lot about who you are internally.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay, go ahead.
And so imagine post 48, post the Independence Day War, all the surrounding countries attack Israel. Many Palestinian villages join with them. Those Palestinian villages get displaced due to the war. All Palestinian villages that didn't attack Israel are still there, which is why 20% of Israel's population is Arab/Palestinian. But now you have Palestinians who are in the diaspora. Okay. Refugee camps in Jordan and in Lebanon by hundreds of thousands, Palestinians in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians all around the world even, that are not a part of Israel. What do you want them to identify with? You want them to consider themselves Israeli? They can't. Yeah. They're not. Yeah. Right? So what other word are they going to identify themselves? They're not Arabs. Yeah. Like some of them might say we're Arab, but they'll say we're Palestinian before anything. Yeah. Because this is the land that they come from. Yeah. And so they're identifying as Palestinian because for them it means we are the descendants of the people who've been living here for thousands of years, a land that has been called Palestine.
I know, but if 90% of them descend from Jews, then it would just be that you were Jewish.
Well, if we open the door and we're more accepting to those that do want to come back, which there are, it'd be different. But we know very well that the Jewish people, due to trauma and being so insular and targeted by the outside, are very afraid of outsiders coming in. Right. And that's also a theme for other communities who have yet to come back in as well. So I'm not saying necessarily all the Palestinians are going to come back to Judaism. Right. But if we can understand that we have the same ancestors, and we have the same love for this land, there is space for both of us to exist. And if you look at the aspirations of both, they don't contradict. We can create a reality with both. Now, what Israel should do in practice now, first and foremost, create freedom of speech. Okay. There are many Palestinian leaders that I work with that I know that would represent their people, and not from a token place of saying, I'm going to say all the Israel talking points and never talk about my people suffering, but be true leaders of their people and not view Israel as their enemy and be part of this creation of coexistence and unity. But they can't speak up. If a Palestinian says something against Hamas, against the Palestinian Authority, or even humanizing Israel, they disappear the next day. Right. So Israel should first and foremost.
Israel need to destroy the PLO and Hamas, and then is this a way that we will, help free Palestine?
For sure, no Palestinian in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria sees Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, as a true representative of their people. Yeah. I mean, he's on his 20-something year of his 4-year term. Hamas was on its 18th year of its 4-year term. So these structures and representatives are not the true leaders of Palestinians. Right. Palestinians are very tribal. If you go to the different towns and cities, it's usually a family that runs that town, and you have a patriarch, father or grandfather, and that's the person that makes the decisions. Yeah. And they all in that city want that. They don't want to be run on a national vote, which is interesting. Most Israelis don't care who their mayor is. Right? You go to Tel Aviv and Kfar Saba and Jerusalem, they're like, who even is the mayor? Like,
I know.
you know, we don't really know. I mean,
I
there's some
tell people, I want to show at the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. They're like, who?
Yeah, they're like, what?
Yes.
But for Palestinians, it's the exact opposite. They care more of the local control than the national control, which shows again that our aspirations are different, and the way we can structure things can actually fit in potentially in a federation plan or in a canton system like Switzerland or in an emirate system like Dubai. There's many ideas floating out there that could work for our people. But first and foremost, Israel must use its power to change the situation, create freedom of speech, invest in education, invest in propping up and allowing them to teach their own leaders and people to rise up and teach their population, investing in infrastructure, in sewage, in roads, in job opportunities. Once those relations and experience start to change, to remove the checkpoints and the walls that prevent us from access and slowly go into a place of integration. Now,
Rudy, this is so aspirational. I'm like, oh my goodness. You know why? Because I hear you and like I agree with parts, but then sometimes, like from a Black American perspective, it was always like, oh, the white people need to help you and they need to help you get out because they, you know, oppressed you. But I kind of feel like it takes away from your personal responsibility as the individual and as your own community, you know? So now we need to come in and we need to be your saviors, you know? Right. But if you're saying like our role as Jewish people is to give salvation, then I understand. But I think it like we give communities, or I felt here in America at least, that they have like this low expectation of you. You can't do anything. I need this outside person from another community to come to help me, to pull me out of the oppression that they put me in, rather than we have instances across history, at least in America, where, you know, Black people created Black Wall Street. We created our own communities. We created our own bus systems. You know, I find it funny that we were like fighting, like with Rosa Parks, she was fighting technically to be on a white bus, but we already had our own bus systems. You know what I mean? So yes, we were segregated, but we had our own systems where we could build ourselves up and pull ourselves out and create wealth for ourselves. So like, where does the personal responsibility come in for Palestinians in this aspiration that you're talking about? Yeah,
so I think the difference in this situation is we're not an outsider. It's an insider helping an insider, and it's a brother helping a brother. Okay. It's not another people looking and saying, oh, well, we want to make ourselves feel good because we ruined the world, and we're going to come and help you. Yeah. It's more, all right, we're the brother that has less trauma, that is less enraged, that has more power and ability, and it's my responsibility to help my family. Yeah. So I think it's not the situation of Black and white relations and the white savior complex that does exist in the world. Yeah. I think it's more realizing that we're here now, we're family, we both live on this land, and if we have the power, we have the responsibility. Just like a parent over their child, just like an older brother over their younger brother, or a younger brother over their older brother. If the situation is that the older brother is in pain and broken, and the younger brother is more mature and able. I have a good friend of mine who his older brother is a drug addict, right? And he, his entire life as a younger brother, has been helping his older brother. So it's more of helping a family member than looking at it as an outsider towards an insider.
I like that. I really like that. How do Israelis respond to that, to shift that paradigm? Think about it like that, as it's your family member. Because if you do think like that, like I'm one of 9 and I'm the oldest girl but the second oldest child, and I have 5 sisters, but I'm like that with all my siblings. Like I feel a sense of responsibility to them, to take care of them, to lead them, for me to be a good leader so they have someone to follow, obviously being in their own identity. But I think a lot about my purpose and what I'm doing in terms of who's watching me in my family and how I have to lead them. So like, how do you think Israelis catch that frame of mind when you say that paradigm of like, look at it as your family member?
Again, it depends who and when. Okay. For most Israelis, if the conversation is to the depth of what we're having, then they'd be like, if that were to happen, I'd accept it. Some Israelis are very hurt, and sometimes when they hear any form of acceptance towards Palestinians as their family or caring about them, because they see the world as, if you're pro one, you're anti the other, and if you're pro the other, you're anti us, and both sides on the extreme see that way, more on the Palestinian side, unfortunately, than on the Israeli side. Anything that humanizes the other side will be seen as, oh, wait, you're against us. And it's a little bit hard to see me as against us, because this is what I do 24/7, fight for the Jewish people on the physical front and ideological front.
Yeah.
So they can't see me as a traitor, but it's hard to accept that message because of the situation we're in. But, the Jewish people are often sometimes sheep. That's why all of our leaders were shepherds.
Yeah.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, there's a reason that they are shepherds, because sometimes you need to lead the flock and take them out of the traumas that they exist, whether it's out of Egypt or now out of our Egypt that we still live in on a spiritual level.
Wow.
So I think we can change, and I don't think it'll happen overnight. Obviously, it's a lot of things that need to take place. And the last thing that's really the hurdle to overcome for a lot of Israelis is the demographic issue, right? How are we going to overcome that? Well, first of all, if we did have a federation system, the demographics wouldn't necessarily affect, but there's a lot more right of returns that need to exist than just the Jews that are the 15 million Jews and recognized Jews and the Palestinians. There's also tribes of Israel.
Yes, let's get into We Were Never Lost.
If they were to come back, not saying that they should come back in order to help the demographics.
Yeah.
They should come back because they're our family. But if they were to come back, we wouldn't have any demographic problem, and everyone could achieve and do what they want in this land.
Okay. So let's talk about the Lost Tribes.
Yes.
Let's talk about We Were Never Lost, the film that you're working on that's going to come out, Bezrat Hashem, very soon. What inspired you to find the Lost Tribes and create this film?
It's interesting. Recently, I found a project I did when I was in 4th grade, where it was like a report project that you do, and you have to pick a topic, and it was actually on Jews in Africa.
Wow.
And I had not remember. My mom found it and stuff, and she's like, "You see, you've been on this your whole life."
And I remember when I first met you, you told me a building that you moved into had like the Africa residence or something like that.
Yeah, there's cool. Constant signs in my life, and
yes.
I'm blessed to have my eyes open enough to be able to pick them up, because I think there's signs that we all have in our lives.
Yeah.
Just we don't all have our eyes open to be able to pick up on them, and then internalize and understand them and add them on, because some people see them but they don't integrate them into their lives.
Right.
So I think this story really starts when I was a student at Columbia University. Now, I had picked to go to that university because it was listed as the #1 most anti-Semitic university in North America, and I created a grassroots student movement and basically led a revolution, and it completely changed the campus and changed the way activism was done on college campuses. Unfortunately, I've been a long time out of campus and it kind of regressed back, but I'm at the Chabad House, because all stories usually start at a Chabad House, a Jewish community center at Columbia University, and I'm working on my laptop, and they have good Wi-Fi, so I'm writing a paper, and all of a sudden there's a woman that comes into the Chabad House, and she's like, "Rabbi, how are you? I haven't seen you." Okay, maybe a former student saying hi.
Yeah.
"Rabbi, I just got back from my honeymoon trip in Africa, and we visited Jewish communities in Uganda and Tanzania, and I brought you back a kippah from this community." And I'm like, "What did she just say? Jewish communities in Uganda and Tanzania? Since when?" And she pulls out this like handmade, beautiful kippah that's different than anything I've ever seen.
Yeah. Has
these like boxed, sharp menorahs with a huge Magen David on top. And she's just like going off on how passionate she is and what a beautiful experience it is. I'm like, "Yo, I got to speak to this girl to see what's going on."
Yeah.
And I let her finish her conversation. I'm like, "Listen, what's the story?" Pulls out her phone, shows me pictures of Black Jews in Africa praying Shema Yisrael with the 3 fingers, talking about Mashiach, talking about how they want to go to yeshiva and then do the army and be able to bring light to the world. And one of them has an idea of like using agricultural technology in Israel and spreading the light into Africa. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
How come I've never seen that? And the feeling that I had in that moment was, I was 24 at the time, was imagine you having several siblings. I'm the oldest of 4. Imagine all of a sudden now you find out that you had another brother or sister you never knew about.
Right.
It's, first of all, it's a shock. We hear about these things, but it's pretty crazy when it happens to you.
Yeah.
And so that was the feeling I had, like, what? I've had a sibling this whole life that I've never known about. And the second feeling was a sense of something being stolen from me. Like, why didn't I know? Why didn't I have this relationship? Why weren't we connected? Like, why is it only now that I'm finding out? And for all of us, like, why do my people not know about this? And the third feeling was, I have to do something to undo it. I have to do something to bring it light, to reconnect us. And like, that's it. Like now I know there's no bringing that back.
Yeah.
And I started to do research.
Where are you going to Africa?
Yeah. I started to do where my grandparents were born, by the way, in Morocco and Algeria.
Yeah.
And so I started to do research, and I find out about all these different communities all across Africa, all across Asia, all across South America. And I'm like, wait a minute. We've all heard that we're 12 tribes.
Yeah.
And we know historically that we descend from the kingdom of Judea, because after King Solomon, we were split into 2 kingdoms. 9.5 tribes were part of the kingdom of Israel. 2.5 tribes were the kingdom of Judea. The Assyrians expel to the 4 corners of the earth, the kingdom of Israel, which are the quote unquote lost tribes.
Yep.
And us, we stay until the Romans come, displace us. We go to Spain and to Europe, the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardic Jews, and some to the east, the Mizrahi Jews.
Yeah.
And we basically are the descendants of 2.5 tribes.
Yeah.
What about the 9.5?
Right.
You know, you go to most synagogues and you see 12 tribes imagery. We hear about lost tribes. It's not a new concept that I invented.
No.
We've all known about it. In the Torah, it says that in the times of Mashiach, the tribes of Israel reunite from the 4 corners of the earth, which is actually an equation. You know, there's an equation 1 + 2 = 3, but you could have 3 = 1 + 2. So the times of Mashiach is the answer.
Okay.
Equals equation. You read it backwards, bring the tribes of Israel from the 4 corners of the earth, and you get to Mashiach.
Wow.
And it makes sense because we can never be ourselves without them.
Yeah.
You know, it's like saying tomorrow all Ashkenazi Jews disappeared or all Sephardi Jews disappeared.
Yeah.
We would feel like, what do you mean? There's like something missing here. We can't be the same without them or without them.
Exactly.
That's because we're conscious of their place, right? Because we know that they belong. If they were disconnected for us for so many generations, maybe we'd forget.
Yeah.
But we forgot about the others. And what was lost was not who they are, but the connection we've had between each other. That's why we named the project We Were Never Lost. Because they've always been there. They've always preserved their identity. They've been through extreme persecution and suffering, oftentimes even similar to the experience of other Jews that we've had, and sometimes even worse.
Yeah.
And so when I realized this, it was like, okay, what if, right, they had come home to Israel first?
Yeah.
And they establish a strong and healthy country with an economy and army and safety and so on. And they were living these abundant lives like many Jews are today.
Yeah.
And our side of the family was being persecuted and killed not too long ago, like in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Or my family that, you know, went through pogroms and persecution in Morocco and Oujda, or in all sorts of places that we were suffering. Wouldn't we expect them to come for us? Yeah. To help us? And even if there's like children that were born during the Holocaust that weren't able to learn Torah and to practice their culture in depth the way they should have because of the traumas, would we expect them to judge us for not being as good or not being as observant? Or would we expect them to understand us and help us maybe catch up to the things that we've lost? And I was like, well, how is it that now my side of the family happens to have been in the storyline on this side and we're not actually helping them? And they are today, many of them still being killed, still being persecuted. How do we not know about this? Yeah. And so my whole energy shifted from just like, you know, I just want to connect them to, it's not just connect them. We need to help them because they should have helped us if it was the other way around. And we need to reunite with them. And that's where all this started from. So we launched the We Were Never Lost project. It's a documentary series. Each season is in a different region. Season 1 is in Africa, 2 is in Asia, 3 is in South America, potentially more seasons to come. Right now, these are the 3 that we're focusing on. And for the past 3 years, we've been to Nigeria, Uganda, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Madagascar, Ivory Coast, and Ethiopia, visiting these communities, bringing their stories back, connecting with them, helping them. And Zat Hashem, the goals of this project is for us to be the last generation that didn't know who we are. And along the way of this project, there's another layer of it that was added on when I experienced them for the first time, seeing my family members. I was like, now I understand why Israel's not working. We don't have all the pieces back. Right? You want to have a car work, you need all the pieces. Yeah. You want to have a body work, you need all the organs. Yeah. You know, you can't have the body of the car and like 2 pieces and expect the car to run. You have so many pieces that are missing on the frame to bring the puzzle pieces back together. To even know the pieces that you have, you don't even know where they fit because you don't have all the pieces in between. And we can never be ourselves without them. It's not just we need to do the right thing and help them because we're now the brothers that came back home and we need to help them the way they would have helped us. Yeah. But we can't even be us without them.
Wow, that's deep. Okay, there's so much to unpack there. Talk to me about how the current Jewish community is receiving the film, the idea of the Lost Tribes. As you said, everyone knows the Lost Tribes exist, but how do people feel about knowing that, okay, these Jews went into Africa, they are Black, they are dark skinned. Where does race come into the matter?
So in Africa, there's also a lighter skinned Jews that are in Madagascar, for example.
Yeah.
So they're not all necessarily one color. There's variation of colors.
Yep.
And they're also in Asia, and some of them look Asian. They have eye features that what you would look at as being an Asian. There's also Bnei Menashe in Northeast India, and they kind of look like a Burma type of people. Like there's all sorts of colors. And many people say, well, did we change into those colors? Well, it could have been that some rape and assimilation, but also we came already with all colors.
Yeah.
Before we were kicked out, we were all colors.
Yeah.
There's several mentions in the Torah of Black Jews.
Yeah.
So it's not like we became Black.
Yeah.
There were light Jews and dark Jews, and we were all colors, and we spread and we remained all colors.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's a difference in the generations. I think millennials and Gen Z, who were raised in a generation that's much more open-minded, that doesn't necessarily see differences based on skin pigmentation, that we're more open-minded to this, which is why I think it's happening now in this generation, because this is the moment that they're going to be accepted.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of older generation, this idea is very new and scary, right? It's like, what do you mean?
Why is that scary?
It's scary because it's different.
Okay.
It's not just the skin color, it's also the eye shapes. It's scary because it's different to them. And usually that comes more from Ashkenazi Jews.
Okay.
Now, I'm half Ashkenazi, half Sephardi.
Okay.
Although I was raised fully Sephardi. My dad likes to joke he converted to Sephardic when he married my mom. So Baruch Hashem, I ate well.
You're not eating a gefilte fish.
I'm enemies with gefilte fish.
Domini, me too.
After I bring back the tribes, I will expel gefilte fish and decolonize our taste buds and remove the oppression that we have in our mouths.
Amen. Let it be.
But, my grandparents survived the Holocaust on my father's side. My dad was raised with them, although he wasn't raised with much spirituality in the house. He was the president of the Jewish Student Union in France nationally. So he had his connection with his Judaism from a more national people perspective, less a spiritual place. But, it's not all Ashkenazim. I would say on average, Ashkenazi Jews are accepting of this.
Yeah.
But a lot of trauma was in the Ashkenazi experience, more than the Sephardi and Mizrahi experience. And having to live in your shtetl and constantly being attacked from the outside, putting your heads down and hoping that you're going to survive, has led to a situation where a lot of people are like, well, who are these outsiders coming in? And it's not even conscious. It's like deep genetic generation trauma that is stored within us that a lot of people have.
Yeah.
In addition to that, we see that when someone is victimized, they often sometimes recreate that.
Yep.
And Ashkenazi Jews who lived in Europe, who were never treated as white, right? They were always seen as lesser. You can't own land. We're going to kill you because you're not white. So they were never treated as white.
So happy you said that. I'm
right?
like,
look,
hey, the Jews aren't white. What do you think happened to them in Europe?
Exactly. Like just a little tangent, but the idea of race is ridiculous.
Yep.
The fact that there is a Black experience is real. Doesn't mean we can't talk about that, and we should talk about that. But the political language of calling someone white is not necessarily just referring to their skin, because there's albino Africans,
right,
and there's very pale Asians, and there's very pale Hispanics and Native Americans. They're not considered white.
Yep.
It's your origins and your experience and status.
Yeah.
Our origins, those Ashkenazi Jews who had an experience in Europe are not originally from Europe, and their status, even while in Europe, was not white. And even though some Jews can be white passing today in white societies, go and speak to a white supremacist and ask him who enemy number one is, and they will tell you it's the Jew.
Yep.
So we're not white. Some Jews may be white passing, but sometimes Black people are white passing.
Yep.
Right? You
That's
have
true.
a name like Joe White.
Yep.
Right? That's a very white passing name. Right?
And we could literally pass for white. Some of us who were mixed and all the things, then, that's how we would get jobs if you were fair skin, very light, or had, like, I have cousins, they have green eyes and have very fair skin. And, I'm dark. I remember I dated this Ukrainian guy, and his parents had never met Black people. And me and my mom are two different shades. She's very light and I'm obviously dark. And, and they said to him, I thought you said Ashira is Black. And he was like, she is Black. And they were like, yeah, but why is her mom light? And why is the kid so, like my nephew, he's like, why are they so light? And I'm like, because we come in different shades, guys, So it's funny.
Yeah. And it's like, in addition to that, even people who are dark can at sometimes be white passing, right? If a neo-Nazi that hates black people and Jews looks on a list of names and they see Shoshana Levy, David Cohen, and Joe Smith, and Joe Smith is darker than you, in that situation, they could be white passing and say, well, I'm going to target the Jews, right? On a house, a mezuzah. You can't be white passing, but a black house or a Native American house, a Hispanic house, they don't know who's inside, could be white passing. So the conversation of white passing is much more, detailed, and there's more nuances here than just saying this is this and that is that. Now, this is not to minimize any other people's struggle, but to understand that there is struggle that exists beyond just one's perception of their own struggles that they have, which is still valid.
Rudy, talk to me about, with this race, I often say, like, the Jewish people now have to define themselves within this frame of Western civilization. So, like, I don't see where we, like, from Israel, where we call ourselves the Black Jew, the White Jew, the Brown Jew. It's just like, we're just Jewish. And now, like, when I come over to America in the West, you have to, like, define, like, I know my podcast is called Black and Jewish, but, you know, like, you have to define yourself as, like, your color with Jewish, whereas I just feel like that's not Judaism. Like, we're just Jews.
Well, the West
We've never defined ourselves by color.
The West is obsessed with color.
Yeah.
You know, and you live in Israel. Not to say that there isn't racism, but there's much less, like, obsession about color in Israel than there is in other places.
Yeah.
I remember even me, I went to a Jewish day school until high school. And then all of a sudden I went to a black school. I went to Michael Kropp in Miami, and they were either black or Hispanic for the most part. You had some Jews, but I remember we had hurricanes here in Miami often. Yeah. And we had a class in, like, a modular little thing. And then they told us, no, we have to go into the main place because that place was destroyed. And because we went to a new classroom, we didn't have assigned seats. And I came late that first day of class. And I came in, it was literally Hispanics on one side, blacks on the other.
Really?
And it was like, why are we self-segregating ourselves? And I went and I sat right in the middle of all the black students. But the point is that we, in this culture growing up in America and in the West, there is an obsession with race, and it is fed already from the younger generation. It's in the culture, it's in the movies, it's in the music, and there's an obsession. It's less in the younger generation, but they are obsessed. And I think that's why a lot of people talk about it. Now, specifically to Ashkenazi Jews, which, again, I want to make it clear that most Ashkenazi Jews don't necessarily view someone based on their color or their race. Okay. But when you had an experience that you're, for generations, for thousands of years, living amongst white people who view the world as they are superior and everyone else is inferior, thus we can colonize the world, sometimes you start to adopt that mentality and that ideology. And so there are some Ashkenazi Jews, it was way more relevant in my grandparents' generation than it is now, that view them as the superior Jew. And that's not just for black Jews, it's also for Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews. My grandfather was born in Morocco, who had blonde hair before his hair turned gray and has blue eyes, right? My grandmother's the more darker one, and they're both born in Morocco. And before that were in Algeria. Sorry, my grandmother was born in Algeria and moved to Morocco. And my grandfather's grandparents were born in Algeria. So they're really on the border. Yeah. He was doing a deal in Israel to buy property, and they assumed that he was Ashkenazi. And then they see the last name and like, wait a minute, you're Sephardi? And he says, yes. I was like, we're not selling land to you. Wow. So that was much more relevant in that generation. It still exists today, but not as much. But it's a reproduction of the traumas that they went through. You know, so there's a lot, we need to look at this not to point fingers, but to heal. Yeah. So when I'm bringing the subject up, a lot of younger generations like, wow, this is giving us hope. Next generation's, mission, right? Generations before us got us here. Now we have missions to do now. Well, this is the next chapter of Jewish history. Like, this is what our generation will do. So it's very inspiring and encouraging for a lot of the youth. But for a lot of, let's say, older generation that are still in this framework and mindset of looking themselves as superior and being afraid of everyone, it's usually coming from a place of fear, but they're rejecting it, some of them. Yeah. And the question, if someone came to me and said, the tribes of Israel have been found, we're going to reconnect with them, they're in Africa, they're in this, I would be like, all right, let's go. Yeah. Show me who, when, how. And we can't just accept anyone who will say that they're Jewish. We need to make sure. Yeah. But I'm going to question for the positive. I'm going to question in order to prove that they're Jews and to find them, not to disprove that they're Jews.
Rudy, so how do the Jewish people prove that these people are in fact Jewish? Is it genetics? How do we define who is Jewish? Is it from the DNA? Is it from the culture? How do we know, okay, these are the Jews? And why is there more of a question of certain people groups other than compared to others? For example, they always question the Ethiopian lineage, which it's crazy because we can see that they were Jews and they kept, from First Temple times, all of these things. But there was a question when they came back. Are they really Jews? So why do some groups get more questions about their Jewish identity compared to others? And how do we define who's a Jew? Like, how do we know? How do we determine it?
Well, how do we define who's an Ashkenazi Jew? Do we define them based on their genetics? No, like rabbinical court would say, if there's no genetics that is found in this person, then we're going to say they're not Jewish. Or if there is genetics that makes them Jewish.
Yep.
I think genetics gives us a map of like where we should, for sure focus. So the Lemba, for example, in Zimbabwe and South Africa, that descend from Yemenite Jews that today are all black. They have a group called the Buba, also Duma in different regions, but Buba and Duma are considered to be the priests. Now, Kohen is a priest amongst the Jewish culture, and all Kohanim, most of them have this genetic marker on their male line that proves that they all come from one male ancestor, which we know that to be Aaron, the brother of Moses, because all Kohanim are descendants of Aaron. So a Kohen in Poland, in France, in Yemen, in Morocco, in Zimbabwe, all have this genetic marker.
Yeah.
For the most part. There's some who they don't find, but statistically, most of them do. They did the DNA test, the Cohen DNA test, on the male lines of the Buba amongst the Lemba, who identify as basically the Kohanim and have that role. And they actually have, percentage-wise, a higher percentage of this genetic marker amongst their population than Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews, which now genetically proves there's no doubt that they descend from us.
Yeah.
Does that mean they're Jewish or not Jewish? That doesn't mean. But we know there's something here, so now we need to see. We need to check. We need to figure out. So the point I'm saying is that genetics should be used to include and not to exclude.
Okay.
And is not the basis of if something is true or isn't true, but is definitely evidence to show that there is truth here. Now let's figure out what that truth is. Now, in terms of Jewish law, halacha, how it's developed in a sense of seeing it as you're a Jew if your mother is Jewish.
Right.
Now, I'm not here to disagree with that. There are many narratives, and I believe in them, that says that we used to see it by the father, and that eventually we changed it by the mother. Whether we should have, whether we did or not, whether we should change it back or not, either way, there's a process for someone to become a Jew, even if they're not Jewish. And I think if that process was less so saying, you're not a Jew, you need to convert to being a Jew, but you're actually a descendant of a Jew, and here's a process for you to reintegrate to our people, then that would be more welcoming.
Yeah.
And actually, I learned from Birnbaum, who is actually on the rabbinate in Israel. He's a chief judge on the rabbinate.
Okay.
And he was visited all these communities like throughout his life. He's like the generation before me that was doing this. Now me and Noam and my team are like the next generation. So it's great to have ones before us who can give us a hand and push us in the right direction. He told me that actually someone who has a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, they're not necessarily Jews by halacha, but they're not goyim either.
So what are they?
They're Zera Israel.
Tell people what goy means.
So goy means nation,
yeah.
Right? So we're actually also a goy, but when we use the term goyim, we mean nations, and we mean nations that are not Jews, right? So it's not in any way good or bad. You can have horrible goy, you could have great goy, you could have horrible Jew, great Jew.
Yes.
So goyim means nation. So a person that has a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, they're actually not halachically considered Jewish, but they're also not halachically considered other nation. They're falling in this gray area that's called Zera Israel, the seed of Israel. And in Judaism, we're not supposed to go and proselytize and convert people to Judaism. But for people who are Zera Israel, it's our responsibility to go and to bring them back.
Wow.
We actually have a role and a responsibility and an obligation to go to these people and say, hey, come back to our culture, rejoin our people. There's a process that we can do. It might be longer, it might be shorter, depending on the person's experiences, but we need to actually have outreach and bring them back. So they're considered of the people of Israel, but not necessarily the nation of Israel. So it's this gray area, and understanding these terms and that there's more unity that exists allows us to be more open-minded towards each other. But at the end of the day, there's unfortunately still these ideas of the other that exists, and it's hard and it's friction, and Ethiopian Jews didn't have an easy time being reintegrated, both accepting mentally and also reintegrating physically, but they were able to overcome.
Is that because they're Black?
They're Black also, but they're also different. And not just different, they were unknown, right? So you look at the Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews, although there's some like rejection sometimes, they've always known about each other, right? They've always known about the Persian Jews in Iran. They've always known about the Iraqi Jews. They've always known about the Syrian Jews. They've always known about Moroccan, Libyan, Tunisian. They've always known about each other. They didn't know about the Ethiopian Jews. So, okay, what is this population? Are they real? A lot of these questions come up, but I think the questions should come up from a positive place. Less so, are they real? How could it be? No, get it away from me. More so, wow, are they real? If it is, let's bring it back. That's where I think the questioning should be. It should be legitimate questioning of figuring out, not just accepting anyone who says that they're Jewish, because we're not going to just open source and say, you know, if you're just going to claim you're a Jew, it makes you a Jew. That's not how it works.
Right.
But if you truly are, and we can look at history, we can look at archaeology, we can look at linguistic history, even anthropology, relation. I mean, I've visited a lot of these communities in Africa, and I can tell you that a thread that exists amongst all experiences.
What is it?
There's many, but one of them that was fascinating is how the non-Jews treat you. Always blamed for all problems in society. Always mistreated, always seen as dirty, impure, other. In Nigeria, the Igbos, they blame them for running the media, for running the economy, for owning all the land, for being the lawyers and the doctors and the businessmen.
They did like a mini genocide on the Igbos as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
which is interesting that in 1967, when Israel liberated Jerusalem, the Igbos, a month later, were like, yo, we got to do our liberation as well. This is the time. Our rest of our family liberated. And so they fought a war of liberating themselves from their oppressive government at the time, because Nigeria is a made-up country. The British basically took three large ethnic groups, the Yoruba, the Hausa Fulani, and the Igbos, that were all living on separate lands, put them together, called it Nigeria, which is a little bit problematic to begin with, right? And then allowed the Hausa Fulani that were economically low but population-wise high, and the Igbos that were population low but economically high, and put them together, created a democracy which will only allow the Hausa Fulani to gain control. But then there would be this natural clash between the majority of the population and the majority of the wealth, and it naturally clashed, and the Igbos were subjugated, their finances were taken away. Them, the Igbos are like, we're not going to put up with this. Like, we're cool with being connected and helping, but don't put us, like, don't steal our stuff. And this eventually led to the Biafra War, and as a response, 3 million Igbos were exterminated in the Biafra War. So they also had their Holocaust, and there's these threads that exist that wherever we're living, we're seen by the local peoples as an other, as we come from somewhere else, as we don't belong, and we're the source of all problems. And somehow we tend to overcome, and most of the time become still successful given the situation.
Wow. Okay. So tell me about these communities in Africa. Do they want to come back to Israel? How do they feel? Do they want to be reconnected? When you come and visit them, are they like, oh my goodness, my brother, you found us, even though, you know, like we were never lost, but like you're here now, you're bringing recognition to us. Nobody knows about us. So how are they feeling?
So I wouldn't say all communities have the same experiences. Okay. There's many differences, which is why it's a documentary series. Each episode, it's its own people, its own experience, its own struggles, its own aspirations. Dependent on the place, there's different ways in how they respond. Now, given that we've been doing this for so long, that we went to prison for this, to a lot of people, it's like, okay, they're valid. You know, this is not, some people are just trying to write a book and to profit and to do their PhD and to make money off of us. These are people who are willing to put in the work and to suffer and to risk their lives to include us in that family. So already we're on a status that when we go to these places right away, they know who we are because they've been following the work.
You're received well.
Yes. The only place that we had trouble being received was actually with the Lemba. And the reason is that there have been many people from the outside, geneticists, scholars, some of them even not Jewish, who've come in, they open their hearts in their communities, and they feel robbed. Their DNA was taken, their stories were taken, And these individuals went and made publications and articles and in these magazines and PhDs, and they all like became like privileged and made money off of them. But then they didn't even care to come back and to help or to share some of that wealth or to, you know, help them be recognized. It was like, you literally just came to use us.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, they have an experience where they're very afraid of outsiders. They're hurt. So when we came in, it was like, no, we don't speak to anyone from the outside. And it took time to build that trust, to build that relation. And for me to explain, like, if your goal is to come back to Israel, let me be an agent, a vessel of achieving that, because my goal is for the rest of the Jewish people to realize that you are their family. How can I get them to realize that if they're not seeing what I'm seeing? I have to show them this. This is not to go and make a film for the sake of art, for the sake of history. This is to change our future history. And it took time to develop relations with them, but eventually we were able to. And so sometimes there's that, but for the most part, it's full of love, full of open arms. And I remember the first time I landed in Africa on this project was in Nigeria. Unfortunately, a day and a half later, we get
arrested.
Kidnapped. But
I don't know why I'm laughing. I'm sorry.
It's all good. Overall, it was
it's like so absurd.
It is absurd,
you know, but it happened.
But like when you look at it in hindsight, now years later, it was a beautiful experience. Honestly, like it was horrible. Like we were starved for a week, no food. We were in the worst of conditions in like a cage with rat feces and human urine.
Why did they arrest you guys?
The government at the time was anti the Igbo.
Okay.
You come to do a film on the Igbo. By nature of doing a film on a population that they deem to or see or have experienced to be their enemies, you are seen as an enemy. And we didn't even come to talk about anything politically or about the Biafra War. We came to just talk about their Jewish history, lineage, connection, and show that to the world. But we were seen as attached to what they perceive to be their enemies. Nigeria is not a safe place. People get kidnapped left and right, whether it's by the government or Boko Haram. And they came to our hotel room at maybe 8 in the morning or 7:45, somewhere very early, with 15 armed gunmen with black ski masks pointing guns at our faces, dragged us to cars, drove us 15 hours away, threw us in a cage, you know, and
what
it was...
What were you thinking as this? Do you remember what you were thinking as this is all happening?
I was looking
like
up
you're
and
going
saying...
from the hotel to the car to the... Like, what were you thinking?
I was like, first of all, my story is not going to end here. I'm not a part of a generation that realizes there's danger and just puts their hands up. I'm going to make it out with my team. And whatever test this is, Hashem, I will overcome. And that definitely made the differentiating factor of being able to survive and to thrive in those situations. And there's plenty of dangerous situations. The first week we were isolated and starved. The next 2 weeks we were in a cage with Boko Haram terrorists, one of which had killed 70 people. So even in the prison itself, it wasn't so safe to begin with. But there were miracles all along the way. Like nonstop. And again, when you're able to see them, you know that there's a path, there's a direction. And, you know, just a side note, in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, we learn that when we die, we don't really die. Our soul elevates to the spiritual realm where all souls exist. And once your soul elevates to the spiritual realm, all the souls are on different levels depending on what they did. The good, the bad, eventually you're higher up or you're lower up. Now, when you're in the spiritual realm, you can't elevate yourself and you can't go down. Because you know all truths at this point. You're connected to this eternal truth of Hashem, the oneness, and you realize all the things you could have done to become better. And you're like, damn, why didn't I do that? I could have done that. I could have become better. And so when you get plugged back into this physical realm, all the souls want to, because they all want to elevate. Now you know the truth. You know what you should have done, what you could have done. And when you do get plugged in, the Creator gives you a series of obstacles in front of you, all catered to specifically fix where you went wrong or how you did wrong in previous lifetimes. And all these obstacles are given to you, and no obstacle is given to you that you don't already have all the tools plugged in within you to overcome. And your soul chooses what you want to do. Your soul says, well, I'll take that. I can do that. I don't want that. I'll do that next time. I want this one. I got this one. And then you get plugged in, you forget everything. That's why we have like a mark here, because it says that like the angel wants to us.
Really?
Yeah.
So cool.
And you forget everything. And now you're actually put through the test without knowing that you're in the test. And so the way I see it is that every obstacle we're in, these are obstacles that we chose to be in. These are obstacles to make us a better person, to have us fix something within us or to the collective. And we have all the tools within us to overcome.
I love that. That's so empowering. I feel like you're like giving me a motivational speech. I'm like, I will overcome.
You will.
You know the song, We Will Overcome.
Yes.
So how long were you in prison in Nigeria?
We're 3 weeks in total.
3 weeks?
Yeah.
When they released you, you guys went straight back to Israel?
Yeah, they took us from there to the Chabad, had our first shower and meal, from the Chabad to the airport, deported.
Wow. And now, but you are able to go back to Nigeria.
So we met with the Nigerian government. We let them know that our project is not here to make Nigeria look bad. It's not here to get involved with the political strife that exists. We're here to tell a beautiful story of Nigeria.
Yeah.
We're here to make you look good.
Yeah.
And it's not my goal, but it's going to make you look good, because in these episodes, it's travel, it's journeys, it's scenery, it's dance, it's music, it's food. There's so much involved with it. And the world is going to want to travel to these places. So it's to elevate the public view that you will have in this world. So it's only a win for you. And if we don't come, the only thing we have to show is a horrible prison experience. Like, do you want that to be what the world sees of Nigeria? So,
good.
you know, it's actually a win-win situation.
So they're like, okay, come back.
So they're like, okay, you can come do the paperwork. And we were in the middle of doing the paperwork, and then October 7th happened. But back to the last thing is, when we did come to Nigeria, it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had in my life. Immediately welcomed with open arms, them feeling so loved that they're finally validated by their brothers and sisters, and people see them for who they are.
Yeah.
We brought a Sefer Torah, which was even a miracle of how we got this in itself. But we were given the Sefer Torah that was like around 250, 300 years old, that survived the Holocaust.
Wow.
And we brought it to them. And I remember when we arrived to their community, I give it to one of the Igbos, and he takes it and he starts dancing with it. And he's like, Torah temima, Torah Adonai temima, which like means Torah is pure. And we're all dancing, and they bring us to their synagogues, and they're speaking in Hebrew, and they're showing me how they do Sukkot and how they keep kosher, and how they have like one siddur, but they took photocopies of many siddurim so that they can have a siddur for everyone. And it's like, you know, just so moving and so full of love. And I remember there was like one guy, Moshe, that I was asking him, I was like, you know, I want to get some B-roll footage of the marketplace. So at some point, if there's a market here that we can go and film, so we can use that B-roll. And he's like, the way you asked me the question reminds me of how Moshe and Bamidbar was talking to the. I'm like, what is going on here? Not only are they like strong, proud Jews, they're like learned Torah Jews. Like, they're really living life of Torah. They view the world through the lens of Torah.
Yeah.
Now, again, it's not everyone.
Yeah.
You go in America, you have 5.4 million Jews. You have 60 to 80% assimilation rates.
Yeah.
So it's not every single Igbo. A lot of them are forcibly converted to Christianity.
Right.
It's not every single Lemba. It's not every single person. But
do the Igbos at large know that they're Jewish? Do they accept that they're Jewish? My ex is actually Igbo. His family, they were converted. So his family accepts that they come from the lost tribes, that they were Jewish, but now they practice Christianity. But I would go to a lot of Nigerian parties, and they would say, no, the Jews just want us to associate with them because we are successful. Like the Igbo Jews, when they come to America, we're the most successful, we're the richest. So because we're smart and successful, of course, the Jews want to attach to us now. But we're not one of them.
Interesting,
We're
because
just
that's
Igbos.
being said on both sides sometimes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And I was like, okay. So that was their idea there.
For the most part, most Igbos were converted to Christianity by force.
Yeah.
Most Igbos identify as being descendants of Israel, but now that they're Christians.
Yeah.
So similar to your ex.
Yeah.
There are Igbos who deny it. There are Igbos who are like, no, we're not. It's not true. This is a myth. This is a lie. And then there are Igbos who fully live it, who never accepted Christianity, who kept their traditions, who kept their values and their culture and their lineage and know who they are. So we came to do a project on those who stay true to who they are. That's not saying that those who were forcibly converted and were born out of their understanding of who they are, that they wouldn't be able to do a process to come back. You know, my goal is to make this open and inclusive and to find the solutions. But I think, of course, we'll have to have either Sanhedrin or the rabbinate involved. It's not up to me to make those decisions.
Right.
I'm here to reveal the problems, to make the connections, and to be a process of reintegration of our hearts. Then the physical reintegration, it's not me to decide. It'll have to have the appropriate bodies to get involved with this.
So the emo Jews now, I feel like, have such a name in the world. Like, people are starting to understand, oh, there are Jews in Nigeria. Like, they're hearing it. They know about it. Like, if I have a conversation with a layperson, they're like, oh, yeah, I heard about it. So because this acceptance is starting to happen, are the Igbo Jews wanting to go back to Israel?
So I'll put it like this. There are about 50 million Igbos.
Okay.
There's about, I would say, around 50,000 who are practicing Judaism the way that me and you know it.
Okay.
Again, doesn't mean there's only 50,000 descendants of Israel. There's 50 million descendants of Israel, but there's 50,000 about that we know. There's about 50 million Pashtuns in Afghanistan that were forcibly converted to Islam.
Okay.
There's about 250,000 Lemba. There's several tens of thousands Jews in Tanzania. Many of them are still in
What
hiding.
you're saying is we need to expand our borders in Israel.
These numbers...
we need more land.
These numbers become very big, right?
Yes.
Even the Bnei Nusim, descendants of Sephardic Jews that were forcibly converted to Christianity, who through Columbus managed to smuggle them all out to the Caribbeans, to Central and South America. This population that we have today of Zera Yisrael, the descendants of Israel, are about 500 million. Wow. Now, of that, not all are identifying as Jews and of Israelites. The same way in America, 5.4 million Jews, 80% assimilation rate. So only 20% are really keeping their identity, 20 to 40, depending on some
Why is that
estimates.
always the story? They say only 20% left Egypt, 80% of the Jews wanted to stay with Babylon. When Ezra was coming to build the second temple, they wanted to stay in Babylonia. Only 20% came back, 80% stays. Like, why are we always wanting to stay?
It's a repeat. It's like these archetype stories are the formulas that are replayed. But once you understand the formula, you know what input to get for the right output, which is why our holidays are so important, because it's looking at a situation, criticizing us for messing up, understanding where we went wrong, and understanding the lessons we take to make sure we don't go wrong again. Like slavery in Egypt, right? That we mentally and spiritually were allowing ourselves to assimilate, which then eventually led to our physical enslavement. We look at Hanukkah, of like Jews being Hellenized. We look at all of our holidays are like understanding where we're on Purim, right? We're assimilating and fighting each other, and Mordechai somehow convinces all the Jews to fast. I don't know how you did that, you know, but through fasting, which is an omitting of eating, but because we did something, we did nothing together. That's what we did. Right. But because we did it together, miracles happened and eventually we were saved. So you look at all these storylines, our holidays are to teach us where to understand where we went wrong and preventing that from happening again. So unfortunately, there's a lot of assimilation. And now if you have this 500 million population, I would say about 15 to 20% are identifying still as Israelites.
Okay.
About half of them want to make Aliyah.
Okay.
That's 50 million.
Can you explain to the audience the difference between identifying as an Israelite and a Jew? What that means?
Just to say this number, 10% of 500 million is 50 million. That would make Aliyah tomorrow. Wow. Which changes the game. It makes us become who we are. Most of them are young. Most of them are educated. Most of them are passionate in wanting to do something. So that's the opposite of what we have in Israel, which is brain drain. A lot of skilled people leaving. If they move to the north, to the south, to Judea and Samaria, to Gaza, we can lift up this country and then allow Palestinians to be integrated and then allow Palestinians to have right of return. So it just shows that we
don't have to worry about demographic issues.
And Palestinians can have everything they want. We can have everything we want. The point is that if we really push towards fulfilling the aspirations of all people separately, even, it actually eventually is a key to unlocking each other. In terms of Israelites, now to be a Jew is a synonym for being an Israelite, a Hebrew, a Judean. These are all different names that were used at different periods of time. Now today, those who've, for let's say the past 2,000 years, have been identifying with this term Jew, they're usually a descendant of that kingdom of Judah that was separated from the kingdom of Israel. And because we descended from Judea, where Judah was the largest tribe, we became known as Judeans. Now, I personally am from the tribe of Levi. My dad is a Levi. My mom is a descendant of Kohanim, which is a sub-tribe of Levi. So from both of my families, I'm a Levite, but I'm still considered a Jew. Why? Not because I come from the tribe of Judah, but because the land that my ancestors were kicked out from 2,000 years ago was called Judea. And so growing up, I was like, okay, if the land today is called Israel, which is actually the proper name of the land and the entire nation, including my tribe,
right,
that makes me an Israelite. That makes me an Israeli. Yeah. So today we're using the word Jew basically to replace what we used to call Israelite. And the Torah never says Jews.
Right.
It says Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, or Ivrim, the Hebrews. Yeah. Right. So this is a newer name that is just a synonym. And even the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews that never called themselves Jews, when they came back home, they're like, okay, people are referring to themselves as Jews, which just means the same nation we're from. So we're Ethiopian Jews, but it's all a synonym. Okay. Now, some of them, or many of the tribes, have yet to come back home. And because they haven't yet come back home, they haven't really adopted necessarily this term Jew. So some of them in the diaspora are like, yeah, we know what it means and we're Jews too. And some of them are like, no, we're Israelites. So it's like, we've always known, like, you want to come with me with this new term, like, you know, for thousands of years we've been like fighting to survive being murdered, and we've known that we're Israelites. Now you want to come and tell me that I'm a Jew? So again, it's like a nuanced conversation, but a Jew and Israelite and a Hebrew are descendants of the same ancient civilization, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, and so on.
Talk to me about African Americans and them possibly being descendants of Israelites. Lots of us come from West Africa in our DNA. Lots of us are Igbos. Lots of us are from Nigeria and Ghana, etc. Yes. What do you think about the African Americans? Are we part of the lost tribes?
So this is a beautiful conversation, an important one, but unfortunately, such a touchy one for so many people. First of all, if we look at the transatlantic slave trade, that isn't just in North America, but also in the Caribbean and also in South America. Yeah. A large percentage of those communities were of Israelite descent in Africa. So 20%, and that's like one of the smaller percentages, were Igbos of the transatlantic trade. And the Igbos are Israelites. Yeah. And we need to understand that it's not white people that came and stole black people. Yeah. It's certain black people that took other certain black people, brought them to the coast and sold them to the white people. Right. And if we look at the groups that were constantly persecuted, no matter where they were, but including in Africa, it was always the Israelites. And so it would make sense.
That's who sold.
Yes, the Israelites were the ones sold. Yeah. And so they were taken in. There's also records of looking at names that have very Jewish names, Israelite names like Shmueliyah and all sorts of stuff, of like to look at slave records of their names. Like there's many proofs that exist. So unfortunately, many of our people in Africa were taken in these slave trades, and their identities was beaten out of them. There's a lot of things that I think Jews have to learn from black people in America. Strength, being empowered, being fearless, responding when you need to respond to. But there's a lot of things that black people look at the Jewish experience and they're like, well, you have identity, right? Because black is a skin color. It's an experience, but it's not a people, right? American is like our current, where we were born, but it's not where we come from. Right. Africa is a continent. It's not a people. It's not a nation. It's not its tribe. It's not its language. So who are we? And a lot of people are trying to find their identity. And, you know, although we also went through persecution from the Jewish side, we kept that identity for the most part. Yeah. So although many Jews don't know their tribes, we know which nation that we come from. Right. So now, if we're talking about that, a strong percentage of the black trade to Americas and to the Caribbeans were of these Israelite descents, not all. Yep. And then there's another thing that I'd like to take a pause. If you speak to rabbis that perform conversions, they'll tell you that about 60% of the converts that they convert legitimately, right? Yeah. At some point in their life find out that they were actually Jew all along. Yeah. Which is crazy. Yeah, that's a large percentage. Which shows that when you have this Israelite ancestry, there's something within you that's going to resurface. Now, I even have a story of this. My grandparents on my father's side survived the Holocaust. My grandmother as a child survived in a nunnery. My grandfather survived in an attic. All their families were exterminated. And so my grandfather, who was born in Poland and went to France and hid in an attic with his family and friends, never knew any cousins, any families, any uncles, nothing. They were all killed. A few years ago, we found out that actually one of his cousins survived. Now, she was born when the family was split up, so no one knew to come back looking for her. Wow. The family left her with non-Jews, left because it was like the winter and they couldn't take her because she was just born, and they were killed. And so no one came back for her. And she was raised in a non-Jewish family. At some point in her life, realizes that she was a Jew all along, because her parents that were adopted tell her that you're Jewish. She doesn't really say anything about it.
Yeah.
Marries a non-Jew, but she's Jewish, so her children are Jewish, and she has daughters, and so their children are Jewish as well. And at some point, there's like something said between the eldest daughter that speaks to her mother and tells her mother, I think you're like a third Jewish or something. I have like, there's like some Jewish energy there. And the mom's like, I'm not a third Jewish at all, because I'm 100% Jewish.
Wow.
And the family realizes, wait a minute, we're Jews.
Yeah.
And they come back to Torah. They come back, they have mezuzot on their houses. They keep kosher. And all of a sudden we have a whole part of our family that has come back. Unfortunately, they still are not able to make aliyah because there's not enough proof, by the rabbinate, which shows that this problem is, much more than just in Africa.
Yeah.
And genetically in the DNA test, 100% first cousins with my grandfather. And we've traced exactly who they are. But how is it that this is supposed to be lost?
Yeah.
Somehow it comes back up. So the reason I bring that up is because there is a clear phenomenon that when someone has Jewish ancestry, somewhere in the descendants, it will rise back up. Now, if a lot of people in the Americas have Israelite ancestry, not all black people, many of them do, it would only make sense that at some point people would wake up and want to find their identity and reconnect with the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of these individuals who feel that they're Hebrews, whether they're not or not, we have to at least admit that they feel it.
Yeah.
Right. And they come to other Jews and say, my brother, my sister, I'm a Jew too. What do you think most Jews in America respond to that?
What do they say?
Get out of here. You're Jewish. Yeah, right. Get out of my face.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, they're usually met with rejection. And they're looking for answers. They know it's true. Or whatever you're going to say, the other, we know it's true.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for answers. And who's the only person willing to speak to them about this? Louis Farrakhan. And here, Louis Farrakhan takes a seed of truth, manipulates this truth, transforms it, and says, oh no, those white Jews are the ones who financed black slavery, are the ones who stole you, they stole your identity, and they stole you. And they take a seed of truth, which is based on something real, and they manipulate it into a full-blown lie and create replacement theology and say, oh, it's them. And then what do you see?
So it's Farrakhan's stance that African Americans, you guys are Israelites, but the white Jews took your identity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's his stance.
Yes.
Okay.
And he's playing on that, and he convinces them. And so what do we see now with some black Hebrew Israelites, which there's black Hebrew Israelites in Israel who serve in the army. Yeah. So not all black Hebrew Israelites are against the Jews and are saying we're Jews and not you. Yeah. Most black Hebrew Israelites are saying you're Jews and we're Jews too. Yeah. So, unfortunately, the very loud and due to trauma, hateful ones online doesn't represent the majority. But those that say that,
ones in their Power Ranger suits in New York.
Exactly. Well, for me, I kind of admire that. They're trying to find their culture again. You know, they're trying to, even though it might seem insensitive if you're looking at it as oh, they're non-Jews trying to be Jews. It's they want to find out how to dress. They want to connect. I saw some of them wearing sudras. Yeah. It's just they're trying to find something. I'm looking at it from its source, not its outcome, its source. Where are they coming from? Where are they why are they doing this? What is the intention behind this? And so unfortunately, those who are taught that they stole your identity, then what we see is a projection of that rejection. And they're then saying, oh, you Jews are the fake Jews and you stole our identity. And unfortunately, we're in this situation. But this could all be fixed if in that first conversation they had, coming to a Jew and saying, you're my brother and sister, we being sensitive, understanding the history and saying, the fact that you're saying that, most of the chances are that you probably are. Now, it's not just because you say it that you are. Yeah. Right now, there's no way for us to prove it unless we can trace your history. But if you are, and clearly Black Hebrew Israelites want to learn Torah, right? And in order to convert, you need to learn Torah. Yeah. So it's not like they don't even want to do what you would technically need to do to convert. Right. They just don't want to have it being called conversion. Yeah. So let's call it reintegration. Right. If in order for this side that are holding on to the staff of Judaism are saying you need to learn X amount of Torah to be reintegrated, and you already want to learn that Torah, so do what you want. Let's make that accessible for you. Let's be open-minded and welcoming, and everyone's happy. It's
true. I did my process of conversion, but to me, it was just my process of returning home. Mm-hmm. Really, I grew up with the story that we're from the Lost Tribes. My grandparents, all of us, like we had the last name Samuels, the last name Solomon, etc. All of us had like Hebrew names, etc. But I also struggled with like this idea of like converting, because you're like, what are you converting to if I already am? Right. But then again, you want to get married, you have to be in the system. And so, two, I think the beautiful thing is, like you said, like Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardi Jews, they were able to keep the Torah. So now we get to return and go back to our brothers and sisters and learn Torah, because they kept Torah and we were lost. We were abandoned. We didn't get it. So now we have this process that we get to go learn from. So I think when you change the paradigm and the perspective, it's not so like offensive to your identity. If you look at it like, okay, I get to go now learn, like teach me now.
There's a midrash that talks about when Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, when he passes away, who has, let's say, the sons that become the 12 tribes, each son gets a specific blessing. And that blessing eventually actually ends up being their logo. Like when you see the 12 tribes logo, it's based on that blessing in the Torah. And the tribe of Judah gets the blessing that you will preserve the scepter, the staff of Torah.
Yeah.
And the Midrash talks about how you will have a responsibility to bring that Torah back to your brothers and sisters. Now, his brothers never lost it. It's only much later, right? We go into Egypt, we get out of Sinai, we go into Israel. So it's not even talking about his immediate brothers and sisters. It's foreshadowing to eventually the tribes who will unfortunately lose Torah, and us having a responsibility to hold on to it, to make it accessible for the rest.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I want to go back to your point about rejection. Say the Israelite comes to the Jew and says, hey, we're Jews. And then they say, what are you talking about? Like in America, for example. I want to segue that into Black and Jewish relations. How can we heal whatever divide exists? What do you think is the divide? What is the division? And what is the way forward for us?
So there's a lot of misunderstanding that exists amongst both communities of who they are, of maybe assumptions due to media, due to limited relations with one another. I was actually having a conversation with a Black leader the other day, and he was saying that, many Jews were in the civil rights movement, but most Jews weren't. And he was like, most Black people weren't. Right? Because it was only a few individuals that were willing to risk their lives in order to push for things. So just because Jews were heavily involved, it's not most Jews that were. So we need to understand that we didn't have a relationship at once where all of us were together, united. There was much more unity. There's been much more division that has been created. But to heal that, there needs to be understanding. There needs to be care. There needs to be involvement with one another. And I look at it also from my own personal experience, that I went to a Jewish day school until high school. Never had a Black friend, and all of a sudden all my friends are Black, and I'm in a culture that's very different than the one I was raised with, and I'm finding the balance of how to be a Jew in this space and how to be able to share my story with others, and then hearing similar stories and sometimes even taking inspiration from those stories. I was raised in America. I came here when I was 5. Well, Miami. Some people say it's not really America. When I came
here,
sound
like the people from Muncie, New York. They're like, "Oh, I'm going back to America." I'm like, "We're in America." They're just like, "No, New York is America." Like,
okay. But I was in Miami. Like, even if you're born here, you're Argentinian, Venezuelan, Colombian, Haitian, Jamaican, Cuban, Dominican, everything. But even I landed the other day. I get into the taxi. It's like, "Hola, cómo estás?" I'm like, "Habla inglés?" No, habla inglés. Like, the people here, like, English is a second language. But point is inspiration. So growing up in America, you learn about the civil rights movement. And when I first learned about the civil rights movement, I'm like, why did we even have such a thing that we are divided? My soul already from a young age was like, there shouldn't be injustice in this world. There shouldn't be division. We need to unite the world. Like, why is this happening? Why were we even there? And I was like, kind of disgusted, repulsed, and frustrated. I was like, this doesn't even make sense why we're living like this. And then you learn about how the civil rights movement were able to get recognition, at least on a political level, and in the laws, not all laws eventually, but most laws, that Black people would have equal rights with white people in this country. Which doesn't mean that there isn't still racism, culture and systemically in other ways, but clearly things happen that if we go back 70 to 80 years ago when the civil rights movement was happening, which isn't even that long ago, till today, we can see that culture has shifted. You could go to a place like Columbia University, and I went to a very liberal school and say something openly racist, and at that time that could have been the norm. Whereas today, I dare someone to go and try to say something slightly insensitive against a person of color or women or any of these minority groups, you'll be kicked out right away. Right. Try to do an encampment against Black rights. See what happens to you. Right. That cannot exist anymore. But it could have. And it was not too long ago. So how do we go from point A to point B? Which doesn't mean there isn't still point C to go to. It's because of a bottom-up approach. It wasn't people at the tops that were saying, well, I realize I don't want to be racist anymore. It was people on the bottom that shifted the mentality of the younger generation, shifted pop culture, shifted the climate, created an understanding of, that racism was bad, that sexism was bad, that, looking at other people based on their gender or based on their physical attributes, that something was bad. And eventually this generation became enough of a voting bloc that influenced the decisions and the policies of those who are in higher positions, because they're like, okay, we want to get elected. We have to care about these things, even if we don't care about them. And eventually those individuals grew up and replaced the people in positions of power in education, in media, in politics. So it was a ground up approach. And I always say it, that Black people weren't granted their rights. They earned their rights. They fought. A lot of them bled. A lot of them died to get to the rights. Even had Jews that died along the way to help them get to the rights. But if Jews want to be respected in society, we can't just demand respect. You have to earn respect. You have to make sure to condition the society to recognizing that anti-Semitism is wrong and why it is wrong, and how to get society to understand how to respond. And that's something that I think the Jewish people need to learn from the Black experience in America, of how you guys have stood up and fought for your rights, and we have yet to do that. So I think if we start really diving deep into building these relations, we have to understand how we both empower each other. And there's a lot of things like financial literacy that the Jewish people kept that a lot of Black communities can keep. There's much more division within the Black community than there is within the Jewish community. So there's pros and cons, and there's suffering, and there's also overlaps and similarities that exist. And I think if more of us started to unite and to shift the culture, that could be done. Now, I think We Were Never Lost is going to play a big role in starting that.
Bezrat Hashem. Bezrat Hashem. Rudy, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so happy that you gave me your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm leaving like motivated, like, okay, I'm ready to go fight. I'm ready to go do something. I can't wait for the film to come out. Do you have an estimated time that you would like it to come out? Can I get some insider secrets? What's going on?
Estimated that I would like for it to come out is yesterday.
No, you still have to go back to Nigeria.
Yes, exactly. So we're I would say about 65% complete with the project.
Okay, that's a large part.
We filmed most of the episodes except for Nigeria. We have 3 episodes that are fully edited, a 4th that I would say is around like 50%, a 5th that we filmed haven't edited yet, and then the last one that has to be filmed still.
Okay. All right. So when are you going back to Nigeria? Can you say? Or is it coming up?
I don't know yet, because there's still a very tricky situation in Israel.
Okay.
That might require me to be called back.
Okay.
And I don't want to plan anything until then, because I want to be able to go and not be pulled out.
Yeah.
So we'll see after the summer.
Quick question. When you do go to these communities, how long do you stay to film and get their stories?
It depends.
Like a week, a month?
It depends on the size. It depends on if there's several communities or if it's just one. In Tanzania, we just had one community.
Okay.
In Nigeria, you have tens of communities. So it depends the size of the population, the amount of communities. It's usually about, I would say, could be anywhere from 2 weeks to a month.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you for being here. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Follow Rudy Rochman on Instagram. What's your Instagram handle?
Rudy_Israel. Israel's my Hebrew name.
Okay. And then what is your Twitter or X we're calling it?
Rudy Rochman on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and TikTok.
Okay.
And just on Instagram, it's Rudy_Israel, which is also part of my identity.
Follow Rudy Israel everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.